Hi, my name is Logan from Death Angel Entertainment, and I am here to talk to you about the Veil Between Worlds, a new expansion pack game module for the deck building game, The Veil. We have three new card types for this game mode. You have settings, enemies, and bosses. We're also going to be releasing a game mat that lays out the entire combat format for you, so you don't have to remember anything, or you don't have to keep going back to the rulebook to learn it. But you don't need the game map to play this. All of these functions and encounters are going to be listed in the rule page for the Between Worlds expansion. So the way this works, you would shuffle up the settings cards, the enemy cards, and the boss cards into the three separate piles. And then for the first encounter, you would reveal one setting, one enemy, and then one enemy for each hero that's facing the encounter. So the way Between Worlds works is you can play it as a solo adventure, or you can play it in a multiplayer cooperative format. So you would take your turn first. The full rules for how to take your turn and play the Veil deck building game would be in a separate tutorial. I'll have the link for that in the description below. But you would take your turn first. You would be trying to damage the different enemies that pop up. Shield enemies would have to be eliminated first. Certain enemies cannot be slain. That's an instant kill mechanic in the game. And the objective is going to be to eliminate all the enemies at an encounter to be able to progress to the next setting. So you don't have to remember the hit points for enemies. In other words, if you don't kill them that particular turn, on the next turn they would be rising back to full health. So assuming there are still enemies left on at the end of your turn, you would then progress through the different actions that the setting and the enemies would take. So you take your full turn, and then let's say there's still enemies left here. Zernon's Spire would then activate. So it says banish the highest cost card in your fate route. So each player would then go into their fate route and banish the card with the highest cost. If there's multiple cards of the exact same cost, the individual player would get to choose which ones they're getting rid of. So then the Ursa would take its turn, which in this case is 5 damage. So it would exhaust, and then you would do the 5 damage. And then after that, the Apparition would take its turn, and it would be dealing 2 damage. The Apparition also has kind of an interesting ability where it does not take any damage from recruits or aggro cards, so you'll always want to keep that in mind when you're facing against an Apparition when you're trying to eliminate it. The way damage is dealt is actually also printed right on the game mat. Bosses, you would be tracking their health. We'll get to that in a second. You restore unkilled enemy health to full at the end of each turn. That was what I just discussed earlier, where you don't have to track enemies' health. If they're not killed, they're back to full health at the end of that turn. You eliminate a setting after all enemies and bosses have died. And then unless a card specifies otherwise, damage is dealt first to shield recruits, second to non-shield recruits, third to the hero with the most health. Now there are some enemies and bosses that deviate from this structure, but I just wanted to have that sequence of damage right there available. So again, you don't have to really remember anything. You can just play right through the encounter. Okay? So as you're taking your next turn, if you, let's say you're able to eliminate the enemies, they're removed. Even if you're in the middle of the turn, if you eliminate all the enemies and the bosses, then you are able to progress from the one setting to the other. Once you move on from this setting by eliminating all the enemies and bosses, you'd remove the setting and no longer be affected by these negative effects that the setting provides. So that's gone. Then we reveal the next one. Here we're in the Colosseum, where all humans and beasts deal an additional damage. So again, we're doing 2 enemies on this first one. And the second one, it's 2 enemies for each hero. Now the way I prefer to do this is mobs. So for the Goatman, since we know we're going to have 2 of them, I would just put a counter into play. And this is an additional Goatman. And same thing for the Pit Fighter, which is 2 for each hero. So in a multiplayer game, let's say you're playing with an ally, you're the Necromancer, your ally is playing as an assassin. There would be 2 Pit Fighters for your character and 2 Pit Fighters for your ally's character. And as you eliminate, each one of these Pit Fighters is going to have the exact same ability, the exact same health. As you progress through the setting by eliminating all the enemies, you would be killing off the counters as well. The Goatman is a beast, so it would receive the bonus from the Colosseum. So instead of 3 damage to each hero, it would be dealing 4 damage to each hero. And the Pit Fighter is a human, so it would also receive that normal bonus that would be from the Colosseum. However, in this case, the Pit Fighter doesn't actually deal damage. He just slays the recruit that deals the most damage. So because he is classified as a human, and the Goatman is classified as a beast demon, each of those would receive the bonus. However, in this case, the Pit Fighter wouldn't be dealing extra damage to you because he doesn't deal any damage at all. So once you're able to kill all the enemies in this setting, that setting would be removed, and then you would move on to setting 3. And here we have a new part of the game. We reveal the setting. Now we're in the Eastern Marsh, where it reduces the maximum health of all heroes by 5. So that means when you're healing, you can't heal up to your full health. Your health is just lower. And something like this to keep in mind, if you're playing a villain character counts as 2 heroes. So if you're playing the villain Archmage, your maximum health would now be minus 10 because you're 2 heroes. And here we have a boss. So reveal the boss card. Here we have a mean guy named Taros, who again, he's a demon. He scales up for each hero. So the way Between Worlds is designed, it is meant to get more and more challenging the more players you have in the encounter. Okay? It also gets more and more challenging each time you progress through the settings. So by the time you're getting to setting 5, things are pretty difficult for you. Okay? So in this case, in the Eastern Marsh, we have a boss now for the first time, and we also have 3 enemies, and then we have another enemy that's 2 for each hero. So here, a forest golem, which has quite a bit of hit points, and you can't slay it. So that's how that progresses. Again, to move past this setting, you're going to have to kill all the enemies and the boss. Setting 4, again, you reveal a new setting. Here we have 4 enemies for the first slot, and again, enemies times 3 for each hero. And then in setting 5, we're actually facing 2 bosses, 5 enemies for the first slot, and again 3 enemies for each hero on the second mob of enemies. So you progress through, and it's meant to become more challenging, and it's a lot of fun. I've been playtesting it here for a little bit, and making some tweaks on some of the enemies and some of the bosses as I run into different adjustments that I felt need to be made on the game design side of it. But this is a fun alternate mode of gameplay. One of the ideas that I try to implement in my game design is I'd like high levels of replay value. So there's a lot of replay value just in the core game itself, but adding this expansion again is going to give you a lot of additional function for the game. We'll be adding additional bosses, additional settings, and additional enemies as stretch goals this next Kickstarter campaign. So thanks for checking out the next Kickstarter. I hope to see you on the backer page, and thank you again for playing the Veil.